Yo, it's Gangsta. That's when you saying Gandhi. Okay.
Yeah, I figured that after a couple of seconds. And it's Gandhi
And you are. Never mind. Welcome to Gangsta.
and Gandhi, where we create a safe space for real talk conversations.
I was discussing the. Trying to find the right feeling. The heaviness of feeling like a failure. What is the definition of success? What is failing? What are you comparing yourself to?
Yeah.
Because often I think the failure is contributed to comparison. And a lot of times it's compared to what is not real. One of the things that really touched my heart this weekend, I was listening to a therapist, and he mentioned that in most cultures all over the world that it's much different than our culture. Our culture is the only culture where they expect one person to do such a range of things. And I know I spoke to you a little bit about it. It was speaking about Waco, Texas, and the cult that was organized there. And when the place burned down, they had sent a whole bunch of staff members to watch or to help the children kind of heal and cope with what had happened. They had watched, a lot of their members killed. They had watched and experienced a great deal of trauma. And in being that staff and being that group and being that community for them, the children were able to get different ranges of healing and help through different people. For example, if they wanted play, they would go to a younger staff member.
Mm-hmm.
If they wanted just someone to just hear them out, they would go to an adult who didn't speak much, who was a good listener. If they needed assurance, they would go to someone else. And oftentimes I realize that, especially for single mothers, and just different people, where you are expected to carry so many roles. You're
Yeah.
expected to, yeah, you're expected to be the one to play with. You are expected to be the emotional one, or the emotional supportive one. You're expected to be a good listener. You're expected to have the wisdom. And it's just, when you are expected to have all these gifts and all these talents and all these things in one person, that's not real, you know? And so when I go back to what are we comparing ourselves to, I think social media is a big doorway where we create this false image of oneself, and then you want to compare yourself to something that is not real. It's not authentic. I remember explaining to you too is that sometimes when I feel a little uneasy or I feel anxious or I feel overwhelmed, I noticed that I would automatically go on social media,
Mm-hmm.
or I would do that. And I realized, I think it was recent when I did that. I felt uncomfortable, and I jumped on social media and I sat there and I realized what you're really looking for is a community.
Mm-hmm.
Because naturally, when we look ancestrally, when we look in our past and we look at how did those people cope, one of the biggest ways of coping was getting with community, talking with people, getting with someone that you are safe with, and being able to be heard. And so when we get on social media, because the platform, it what's the word I'm looking for? It disguises itself as community, when all in all it's a playing field of performance.
I agree.
So it's not real. So then I got on there and immediately I felt empty, and I realized it's because you're looking for something that's not real here, and probably text you because you're
Yeah.
real. But but yeah, I find myself being too hard on myself when I am expecting myself to do what is impossible.
That makes sense. I think when it comes to feeling like a failure, I think a lot of it, you don't really necessarily know what contributes to it until you get to a point where you feel it or you're dealing with it. And I think once we kind of dig through that feeling, it kind of gets you in a space where you're able to recognize perhaps you do have impossible expectations for yourself. Perhaps you are expecting something from yourself that you can't really provide. But it's interesting because I do think sometimes it does take getting to that place where you do feel like a failure to even recognize that that's there. Like we're constantly moving, constantly completing things, constantly looking for the next thing, constantly looking for ways to improve to the point where it takes a stop to realize what we're really doing.
Yeah, that was my point. There were he was saying that the therapist, he was saying that we're the only culture that expects us to do it alone. But in all the other cultures, there's typically a 4-to-1 ratio. There's 4 adults per one person.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes me wonder when it comes down to community, like, how did that become destroyed in this culture? And is that just our culture? And what I mean by that is that African American culture?
That's interesting. I for my classes, I think it was last semester, it could have been the semester before, we ended up just going over like psychology for different ethnicities and so forth. And one of the issues that we tend to run into is cultural relativity, or at least understanding that what means one thing to one culture may mean something different to another culture. And so when it comes to even identifying different cultures, if you look at like a Western nations or like even European nations, there's a lot of times where things are more individualized. So we value individual success, achievement, um, autonomy, um, just things that are more so attributed to the individual over the collective. And then
And you
there's
said that's
other
the
nations
Western culture.
that's more so Western culture,
Okay.
European things of that nature. But then you have more Eastern cultures.
Okay.
These are more like the Asian cultures and things of that nature. They tend to value more family and more connectedness. There isn't as much of a value placed on the individual per se, but it's more so collective. It's what can you do for your family? What are you doing for your community? And there's a distinct difference when it comes to these values. Like even when you think of Americans, one of the things we think about is our careers. We think about what are we going to achieve in life? Who are
Mhm.
we going to be? How are we going to be different? How are we going to individualize ourselves compared to all of these different people? And then you have the Eastern culture where you may have someone who's more so thinking, how am I going to help my family? How am I going to provide for my family? And so I think those mindsets play into how we view ourselves, what we expect of ourselves, and even who we compare ourselves to.
And that makes so much sense because when I look at the Asian cultures and even those in my family, um, because I have Filipinos in my family, I have some Pakistanians in my family, and when I look at them, they're big on family. They're multi-generational households. That's very normal and common to them. So I see that. I see how they value that. And then I look at the other culture, the African Americans and the Puerto Ricans that are in my family, and it is more self, like
Yeah.
just self focused, and not even in the most healthiest way. And it's interesting because I look at both of them, and I look at the Asians in my family, and it is more family, like I said, more family focused. But then with them, I can see how some of them, they it's hard for them to balance themselves.
Mhm.
They're so focused on what can I give you, what can I give you, and they're depleting because they're not balancing themselves in the mix or asking themselves what do they need. But then I look at the other cultures that are in my family, and then you're depleting because you don't have anyone to talk to,
Mhm.
because it's all about what you have to accomplish and what you have to do. So then you're being depleted as well because you don't have that balance of of community. One of the things I heard as well was most of our therapy, our healing comes from just getting on the phone and talking to someone
Yeah.
that you trust. And I know me and you have that very good relationship where it's just like, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. This is what I'm bad. I mean, like we would randomly just text one another. I mean, we didn't even say hello or good morning yet. Just hey, this is what's been going on with me today, you're not looking for a response. You're just looking to be heard. And
Yes.
by the time, and the more of those people that you have in your life, by the time you've gone to the third person and shared what's going on, and you've gotten that assurance, you're good.
Yep.
That's what it's all about. So I see how both of them is necessary. I wonder if there's a possibility to kind of blend the both to have that healthy balance of the two.
I definitely feel like there is a way. I'm not sure of how, but I feel like that would honestly be best. Like to have the value of the individual, but also have the value of that connectedness with like the community or the family. I think that would honestly be the best case scenario. And I find that even going back to social media, like you mentioned, I think we subconsciously look for that community when we lack it. And then I
Absolutely.
also wonder, which I'm more so from that individualistic community type of thing. So I also wonder for people who are more so in the more community based, connected based, do they also hunger for that space to individualize themselves? And so I do feel like there's a balance though. Just that place where they both can meet. They both can meet and both have an understanding of each other while also occupying their respective spaces.
It's interesting you say that because I was scrolling through social media the other day and came across this post that said most people vent on social media when they lack a space to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And I understood that. Which is heartbreaking for me, and it's sad how common that is.
Yeah.
Where in your tribe you don't have one person that you can go to be heard, you can go to be genuine and authentic. You constantly have to perform. And that was on my heart this morning, like, yo, like even the burden of having to be the strong, that was me forever. I still show up as that place, being the strong one,
Mm-hmm.
having to have it put together, and knowing that you are the one to come to. um
Okay, Louisa.
who is Louisa?
Louisa from Encanto?
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
um I was speaking to my brother not that long ago, and he said, do you think it's possible um that you can have a family member that's a best friend? I said, absolutely. He said, because I've always looked at you as a best friend. Do you feel the same way? And I said, you know what, I do, but I don't. And it's not that you aren't that person. It's because I had to tell myself that I had to live up to a certain expectation because you always looked up to me. I was always the go-to. You know what I mean? And so I felt like there was so much I can give you. There was so much I could, like I had to maintain that look up to kind of, you know what I mean? Like
That responsibility, that role.
it's a role. It's crazy though, because why you can't be looked up to by being vulnerable and honest. Me and you were talking about this the other day. 6 888.
Yes. Love.
One of my favorite parts in the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, go watch it. Like, wait, don't finish the podcast, but then go watch it when you're done watching the podcast. Um, but 6 888. The part where Kerry Washington, this is my part. She comes out to the group and nobody's working. Yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. They gonna cast me in the next one. She says, "Get to work." It's the second time she said it though. Like they heard you the first time. She got up real. I'm not gonna stand up. Get to work. And they started clapping and giving her flowers and how she broke down. And just before that part, she was beating herself up for being
Yeah.
her. that was me for the longest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, you can't. And she called it breaking character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're doing. You're playing a role, you're playing a character. You can't break that. You have to maintain that. And but in breaking that and being your vulnerable self, that's where your most power.
Yeah,
That's where your most power comes in.
that's good.